Elon Musk awoke before sunrise to the gentle hum of his state-of-the-art home automation system, which coordinated the myriad tasks of his sprawling estate with effortless precision. In his private study, a room lined with meticulously organized technical blueprints, prototypes of advanced electric vehicles, and framed newspaper clippings celebrating his past achievements, he reviewed a stack of documents that spanned everything from interplanetary transport proposals to detailed financial forecasts for his emerging electric truck division. Although the proposals for space exploration and Hyperloop networks often stole the limelight, this morning's agenda was far more personal. A long-standing contract dispute with a trusted supplier whose performance, he believed, had been critically misinterpreted. A decade of pioneering innovation had taught Elon the value of precision and due diligence. Still, even the most seasoned entrepreneurs sometimes found themselves embroiled in administrative entanglements. This time, the issue revolved around payment terms in a maintenance contract for the electric trucks, terms that appeared to be at odds with the invoices and digital records he had archived. The miscommunication had escalated to a point where a legal confrontation was unavoidable. Although it was just another battle in the constant war against inefficiency and outdated bureaucracy, Elon was determined to see it through with the same relentless drive that had led him to transform industries. He chose not to let the situation dampen his innovative spirit. Instead, he dressed with his customary blend of casual elegance and futuristic flair. A smart navy blazer paired with a pristine white shirt and tailored dark trousers. Each item of clothing was carefully selected not only for comfort, but also as an emblem of his meticulous nature. As he surveyed his reflection in a mirror with a subtle, confident smirk, memories of countless nights spent refining rocket designs and planning Mars colonization mingled with thoughts of everyday challenges like ensuring fair business practices. Before leaving, Elon prepared a light, nutrient-rich breakfast, a carefully balanced smoothie infused with organic ingredients and a handful of nuts. He sipped it while scanning his digital calendar and reviewing pending tasks for the day. Amid the routine check of his schedule, he noted an unusual entry: a scheduled appearance at the Silicon Municipal Court, a venue he rarely associated with his fast-paced world. The reason was clear. A seemingly trivial contract dispute had escalated beyond the boardroom and into the realm of law. Yet, for Elon, every challenge was an opportunity to innovate, to reshape archaic systems with modern ingenuity. Stepping into his private Tesla, a vehicle that was not only a triumph of modern engineering but also a symbol of his personal accomplishments, Elon was greeted by an interior that was a seamless blend of luxury and technological sophistication. The car's self-driving system had already plotted an optimal route through the slowly stirring traffic of the tech district. As the vehicle glided silently along the freeway, the soft glow of the early morning light filtered through the panoramic sunroof, evoking the calm before a storm of transformation. In the background, soft instrumental music played, a mix of classical arrangements interwoven with subtle electronic beats. It served as a reminder of the balance Elon sought in life, the harmony of art and science, tradition and innovation. He activated the infotainment system and tuned into the live newsfeed, only to hear urgent updates about a controversial government directive. The policy in question threatened to shift federal subsidies away from pioneering electric transport solutions, a matter that directly affected his companies and his vision for a sustainable future. Even as he considered the dispute at hand, the broader implications of this decree weighed heavily on his mind. Elon's thoughts raced as he mentally prepared for the day ahead. He envisioned a courtroom not as a sterile arena of rigid procedure, but as a stage where outdated practices could be challenged, where the voice of modern innovation might find an audience. Although his schedule was packed with high-stakes meetings and critical product launches, he was resolute in his determination to confront the legal system's imperfections head-on. This was not merely a business dispute, it was a microcosm of the larger struggle against bureaucratic inertia and systemic bias. As the Tesla navigated through the bustling intersections of Silicon Valley's financial district, Elon's attention was momentarily drawn to a series of digital alerts on his smartwatch. The notifications were from his senior legal advisor, Mira Kwan, urging him to review urgent documents regarding the government directive that had just been announced. A quick glance at the screen confirmed the gravity of the situation. If the policy went unchallenged, it could derail months of progress in advancing renewable energy and electric mobility. Torn between his immediate contractual issue and the far-reaching implications of federal policy, Elon decided to allocate a brief moment of his commute to review Mira's notes, knowing that every second counted. The internal conflict was palpable, a tug-of-war between resolving a tangible, immediate business dispute and addressing a looming threat that could ripple through the entire technological and economic landscape. As the Tesla's advanced AI seamlessly merged the two digital worlds of legal memos and real-time news, Elon found himself in a state of focused determination. He was not simply a technologist, he was a disruptor, a visionary intent on reshaping the very foundations of society. With a deep breath and a steely resolve, he prepared himself for the challenges that awaited him at the courthouse, a stage where the traditional rules of the old guard were about to be questioned by a mind that had never been content with the status quo. The journey to the Silicon Municipal Court was more than just a commute. It was a prelude to a confrontation that would blend the worlds of high technology and the antiquated legal system. Every detail, the meticulously crafted interior of his Tesla, the carefully chosen outfit, the quiet intensity of his gaze, spoke of a man who was ready to challenge convention. The contract dispute, the government directive, the potential for systemic reform, all converged in a single, transformative morning that promised to redefine not only a personal battle but also the way justice was administered in an era that was rapidly evolving. In those early hours, as Elon Musk set his sights on the courthouse, the boundaries between the realms of innovation and tradition blurred. The scene was set for a confrontation that would not only resolve a contractual misunderstanding, but also expose and challenge the deep-seated biases entrenched in an old legal system. Little did he know that this day would mark the beginning of a revolutionary journey, one that would test his resolve, redefine his legacy, and ultimately reshape the principles of fairness and accountability for generations to come. The morning had advanced into a frenetic blend of high-speed decisions and measured strategy. Inside the Tesla, as it continued its silent glide through traffic, Elon's mind oscillated between the minutiae of the contract dispute and the larger political implications of the newly imposed government directive. The vehicle's advanced interface allowed him to split screen between Mira Kwan's latest email and a live analysis of the federal policy. Detailed diagrams, statistical forecasts, and annotated memos scrolled by, each demanding his attention with a gravity that belied their technical complexity. Mira's email was a dense compendium of legal arguments, complete with citations from regulatory statutes and past judicial decisions. The document explained how the subsidy reallocation, ostensibly a move toward traditional energy, could inadvertently disrupt the carefully balanced ecosystem that powered the nation's renewable energy initiatives. To Elon, the implications were clear. The policy was not just a bureaucratic maneuver, but a potential death knell for the progress he had fought so hard to achieve. Every line of Mira's analysis resonated with the urgency of a ticking clock, echoing the relentless pace at which change could either be embraced or resisted. In the midst of this intellectual storm, a sharp chime from the Tesla's onboard system signaled an incoming call. The caller ID flashed Mira Kwan, and without hesitation, Elon answered. Her voice, measured yet infused with urgency, came through clearly despite the ambient noise of the busy highway. "Elon, I need you to understand. The government directive is more than just regulatory rehash. It's a direct challenge to our core innovations. The media is already buzzing, and there's talk of a coordinated political response. We must craft a response that not only defends our position but also exposes the underlying bias that allowed this policy to emerge. The gravity in her tone was unmistakable, and it jolted Elon's focus. "How much time do we have?" he asked, knowing that every minute could make the difference between a strategic win and a public relations debacle. "You've got until noon, but I need to see all the documents right away," Mira replied. "I've just forwarded everything to your secure drive. Please review it when you can. I'll be waiting for your input." Her words were a clarion call for action, underscoring the dual nature of his day: a legal battle in the courthouse and an urgent fight on the political front. The conversation ended with a succinct confirmation, but its impact lingered. Elon took a moment to absorb the weight of the situation. The contract dispute, though critical, was now intertwined with a larger narrative about fairness, innovation, and the future of sustainable energy. He reflected on the delicate balance between fulfilling immediate business obligations and safeguarding the visionary projects that defined his legacy. In this complex interplay of priorities, every decision had far-reaching consequences. Determined to leave no stone unturned, Elon requested that the Tesla park near a sleek, modern coffee lounge known for hosting impromptu meetings of tech leaders and innovators. The decision was strategic. He could quickly set up his portable workstation, complete with a high-performance laptop and a secure Wi-Fi hotspot, to meticulously review Mira's documents. The coffee shop, with its minimalist design and ambient digital art displays, provided an environment that was both inspiring and conducive to intense concentration. It was here, amidst the soft murmur of fellow innovators and the clinking of artisanal coffee cups, that Elon began a thorough examination of the dossier. Every piece of evidence was scrutinized, from the blurred lines in the payment contract to the statistical anomalies in the invoicing records, and even the subtle inconsistencies in the supplier's communication. In parallel, he cross-referenced these details with the legal precedents outlined in Mira's memo. His mind, honed by years of navigating the turbulent intersections of technology, business, and public policy, absorbed the information with a meticulous precision that was almost surgical. The coffee shop, bathed in the natural light of a cloudless morning, became his temporary command center, a nexus where the world of high tech met the rigid structures of law. As he delved deeper into the documents, Elon began to sketch out a dual strategy. On one front, he planned to address the immediate contractual miscommunication with a detailed, evidence-based rebuttal. On the other, he envisioned a broader campaign to challenge the new government directive, arguing that it was emblematic of a systemic bias that threatened innovation and fairness across multiple sectors. His plan was audacious, but so was his career, a testament to his lifelong commitment to pushing boundaries and questioning the status quo. The hours ticked by as he worked, his concentration occasionally interrupted by notifications from his phone, emails from legal experts, messages from his trusted advisors, and even a few congratulatory notes from colleagues who had heard whispers of his impending courtroom appearance. Each communication added layers of complexity to the situation, yet all pointed in the same direction. Change was not only necessary, it was imminent. Every detail had the potential to reshape public perception and, by extension, the very fabric of regulatory policy. Outside the coffee shop, the city was awakening to a new day of possibilities and challenges. The hustle and bustle of Silicon Valley had always been a reflection of its innovative spirit, a chaotic dance of ideas, ambitions, and breakthroughs. In this urban symphony, Elon was both a conductor and a soloist, orchestrating a narrative that transcended conventional limits. He felt the weight of responsibility not just as a business magnate, but as a visionary committed to redefining what was possible in a world constrained by outdated norms. By the time he glanced at his smartwatch again, he realized that the moment of departure for the courthouse was drawing dangerously near. With a final, determined look at the screen filled with legal memos and strategic outlines, he saved all his work and swiftly packed up his portable workstation. The decision was made. He would now head to the Silicon Municipal Court, armed not only with a prepared legal argument but also with a vision for broader, systemic reform. The drive from the coffee shop to the courthouse was a brief yet intense interlude, a time for reflection and final adjustments. As he resumed control of his Tesla, the vehicle's soft hum became the backdrop for his inner monologue. Every detail of the day's unfolding events, Mira's urgent call, the meticulous review of legal documents, the looming threat of a policy that could stifle innovation, merged into a singular, focused mission. Elon was not just fighting a contract dispute. He was challenging the entrenched systems that had long resisted change. In that silent, contemplative moment, as the Tesla's sensors detected the approaching courthouse, Elon Musk prepared himself mentally and emotionally. The complexities of the legal challenge and the potential political fallout coalesced into a defining moment, a crossroads where the ideals of transparency, fairness, and innovation could converge to spark a revolution. The journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty, yet he was driven by the unwavering belief that even the most established institutions could be reformed by the force of a determined mind. The convergence of crisis and commitment had set the stage for a day that would test the boundaries of the old order. In the intricate dance between high technology and rigid bureaucracy, Elon was ready to lead, a leader not merely defined by his technical prowess but by his capacity to challenge convention and envision a fairer, more innovative future for all. Stepping into the imposing marble lobby of the Silicon Municipal Court, Elon Musk felt the weight of tradition and authority pressed down upon him. The courthouse, a relic of mid-20th century architecture with its polished wooden panels and imposing columns, stood in stark contrast to the sleek modernity of the world he had helped build. Every detail of the building, its echoing corridors, the stern portraits of past justices, and the measured footsteps of those who traversed its halls, spoke of a time when order was maintained by unyielding adherence to outdated protocols. Elon's arrival was not announced by fanfare or pomp, but rather by the silent acknowledgement of a system that did not typically cater to mavericks. The reception area was filled with individuals who exuded a quiet confidence born of routine, each one clutching meticulously organized case files and legal documents. Yet, amidst this sea of predictability, Elon's presence was a bold anomaly, a disruptive force in a domain that prized conformity above all. After a brief check-in at the reception desk, he was directed toward a waiting area that was dominated by the ambient murmur of hushed conversations and the rustle of paper. He found a secluded corner where the light from a stained glass window cast intricate patterns upon the floor. In this quiet space, he reviewed his notes one final time. Every piece of evidence, every photograph of a disputed invoice, every annotation that traced the timeline of events leading up to this moment. His focus was unwavering. Each detail had been carefully scrutinized, and now he was ready to present his case with the analytical precision of a seasoned innovator. Soon, a court officer's measured footsteps signaled the commencement of the session. The heavy wooden doors to the courtroom swung open, and a hush fell over the assembled crowd. At the front of the room, seated on an elevated bench behind a large, polished desk, was Judge Bernard Cutter, a figure whose reputation for stern discipline was as legendary as the courthouse itself. Dressed in a traditional black robe, Judge Cutter's piercing eyes and rigid posture seemed to demand absolute respect for the rules of the court. His gaze, hardened by decades of presiding over countless cases, was an unyielding reminder of the authority that this venerable institution wielded. As the session commenced, Judge Cutter began addressing the minor cases with the precision of a conductor directing an orchestra of routine legal matters. Yet, as he moved through the docket, his attention was inevitably drawn to the digital clock on the wall, a clock that indicated Elon's arrival was a few minutes past the scheduled start. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the courtroom, and for a moment the atmosphere grew tense. "Step forward," Judge Cutter commanded, his voice resonating with an authority that brooked no argument. In that moment, Elon rose from his seat with calm determination. His measured stride toward the podium was a silent defiance of a system that prized punctuality above individual circumstances. The eyes of the room were fixed upon him, a young disruptor in a realm dominated by tradition. "Mr. Musk, you were scheduled to appear at the start of this session," Judge Cutter intoned, his tone edged with disapproval as he leaned forward. "Do you consider your time more valuable than that of this court?" The accusation hung in the air, a challenge not only to Elon's timeliness but to the very essence of his modern approach. Elon paused for a fraction of a second, a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, before responding in a calm, measured tone. "Your Honor, I fully acknowledge the importance of punctuality. However, unforeseen circumstances required my immediate attention, and I assure you that every effort has been made to rectify the situation promptly. I stand before you today not to defy the court's schedule, but to present a well-documented case that deserves an unbiased examination." His voice carried both respect and a quiet defiance, a promise that he would not be cowed by a rigid system. A ripple of murmurs swept across the courtroom. Some onlookers exchanged glances of admiration, while others appeared skeptical. The tension was palpable, a collision of old-world order and the disruptive spirit of modern innovation. Judge Cutter's eyes, however, remained fixed on Elon, scrutinizing his every word with the intensity of a man determined to maintain control over his domain. As the proceedings resumed, Elon methodically laid out the details of the contract dispute. He presented photographic evidence of the invoices, annotated copies of the contract, and digital records that clearly highlighted discrepancies in the payment terms. Every piece of evidence was delivered with the precision of a well-rehearsed presentation. Yet, despite the clarity of his argument, Judge Cutter's expression remained inscrutable, a mask of stoic formality that offered little insight into the judge's inner thoughts. Between the formalities, Elon's mind was already working on the broader implications of the case. The seemingly mundane dispute was now intertwined with a larger narrative of systemic bias and outdated practices. He observed with quiet determination as the judge's gaze occasionally drifted, as if he were more preoccupied with upholding a rigid procedure than with seeking the truth. In that moment, Elon resolved that his appearance in the courtroom was about more than just winning a case. It was about challenging an institutional inertia that had long stifled innovation and fairness. The courtroom, a relic of an earlier era, was now the stage for a battle that transcended legal technicalities. Elon's detailed presentation was punctuated by carefully chosen pauses, each one designed to allow the gravity of his evidence to settle over the room. As he spoke, he made subtle references to the broader implications of regulatory bias, hinting at the ways in which traditional practices could be reformed to better serve the modern age. His words, delivered with an almost lyrical cadence, resonated with a growing number of observers who, like him, believed that the old order was in desperate need of change. When the moment came to address the fine imposed for his late arrival, the courtroom's tension escalated further. Judge Cutter's voice, laced with a mixture of authority and irritation, declared, "I find that your tardiness warrants a fine of $500 for contempt." The declaration was met with a mixture of shock and murmurs throughout the room. For Elon, the fine was not merely a punitive measure, it was a symbol, a tangible record of an encounter that would serve as evidence of the court's inflexible nature. As the judge's words echoed in the silent chamber, Elon recorded every detail on his smartphone. His inner resolve was unbroken, even as he faced the punitive measure with a calm composure that belied the turbulent emotions beneath the surface. The courtroom, once a domain of quiet routine, had transformed into a battleground where the clash of tradition and modernity was on full display. Every detail, from the measured intonation of Judge Cutter to the subtle expressions of approval from some of the younger attendees, spoke of a system at a crossroads. In that charged atmosphere, Elon's response was both respectful and pointed. "Your Honor, I accept the fine not as an admission of fault but as a recorded fact of today's proceedings. I request that every detail of this session be documented for review, as I believe this case reveals broader issues of procedural bias and inconsistent treatment. I stand before you not to undermine the court's authority, but to advocate for a fair, transparent, and modern judicial process." His words were measured and resolute, designed to spark a conversation that extended far beyond his personal dispute. The courtroom fell into a hushed silence as the implications of his statement began to resonate with everyone present. The traditional order, long assumed to be immutable, was now open to challenge. In that moment, the dichotomy between the established ways and the promise of progress became unmistakably clear. A clear sign that even the most entrenched systems could be questioned by those willing to speak truth to power. Judge Cutter, his face an impassive mask of authority, briefly paused before resuming the session. Yet the impact of Elon's words lingered in the air, as if they had planted the seeds of transformation in a place long resistant to change. The proceedings moved forward, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The fine, once intended as a final admonition, was now a symbol of resistance, a catalyst for a movement that would challenge the very foundations of procedural rigidity. As the session continued, Elon's careful documentation, his measured tone, and his unwavering composure spoke volumes. The atmosphere in the courtroom was charged with the promise of a new era, one in which fairness, transparency, and accountability were no longer mere ideals, but imperatives. In that historic moment, as old systems clashed with new ideas, the stage was set for a battle that would reverberate far beyond the confines of that marble-walled chamber. The hours that followed in the courtroom were a whirlwind of legal arguments, strategic maneuvers, and mounting tension. Outside the courthouse, the world was abuzz with rumors and hushed speculations about the unfolding drama. Within the walls of the Silicon Municipal Court, the proceedings took on an almost theatrical quality. Elon Musk's deliberate challenge to the established order had transformed a simple contract dispute into an event with far-reaching implications, a moment that would come to be remembered as the turning point for a generation eager to dismantle outdated systems of authority. After the imposition of the $500 fine for his tardiness, a fine that Elon accepted with quiet dignity, he did not immediately seek to contest it in the traditional sense. Instead, he took a calculated pause. Pulling out his leather-bound notebook, a repository of his notes and legal insights meticulously compiled over countless hours of self-study and collaboration with legal experts, he began to outline a series of proposals that would not only address the immediate procedural issues, but also call for a systemic review of courtroom practices. His pen moved swiftly across the pages, recording proposals for a comprehensive audit of the past 6 months' worth of contempt charges, a call for mandatory bias awareness training for all court personnel, and a request for the establishment of an independent review board to oversee judicial conduct. The proposal was not simply an emotional reaction to personal inconvenience. It was a well-thought-out plan to ensure that the scales of justice were truly balanced. With the precision of an engineer and the passion of a reformer, Elon detailed how each measure would be implemented, citing specific instances from the day's proceedings as evidence of a broader pattern of bias. His meticulous notes were a powerful testament to the potential for change when one is willing to challenge the status quo with both intellect and courage. As Elon's presentation unfolded, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from one of passive acceptance to an undercurrent of anticipation. Among the onlookers were young entrepreneurs, legal scholars, and even members of the local press, all of whom recognized that this was more than just a dispute over contractual details. It was a moment when the rigid framework of an aging system was being put to the test, when a single voice had the power to ignite a conversation about fairness, accountability, and reform. Judge Cutter, whose authority had been momentarily questioned by Elon's defiant yet respectful rhetoric, now found himself in an unusual position. His initial insistence on procedural purity had met with an equally forceful counterargument, a counter-argument that demanded not only the application of the law, but also an honest examination of its impact on those who sought justice. In a rare display of vulnerability, Judge Cutter hesitated, his eyes briefly betraying a flicker of uncertainty. The courtroom, ever alert to shifts in power, seemed to hold its collective breath as the judge grappled with the weight of the new reality unfolding before him. The legal arguments that followed were detailed and impassioned. Elon, drawing on his extensive repository of self-taught legal knowledge and insights gleaned from working closely with regulatory experts, articulated how seemingly minor procedural discrepancies were symptomatic of a larger malaise, a system that often treated individuals differently based on their age, reputation, or even their public profile. His argument was bolstered by references to data and statistics that pointed to a recurring pattern of harsher penalties for younger defendants, a trend that was as undeniable as it was unjust. The tension in the courtroom reached a crescendo when Elon formally requested that the entire session be recorded as official evidence. His demand was simple yet profound. "I wish for every detail of today's proceedings to be documented for future review, not merely for my case, but for the integrity of the legal system itself." The statement resonated deeply, evoking a palpable sense of accountability that transcended the boundaries of individual disputes. In that charged moment, the courtroom became more than a venue for legal arbitration. It transformed into a forum for societal introspection. The heavy wooden benches, the stern gaze of Judge Cutter, and even the subtle nods of acknowledgement from members of the gallery bore witness to the emergence of a movement. Elon's challenge was no longer just about a misinterpreted contract. It was about demanding transparency and fairness from a system that had long been cloaked in the mystique of tradition and unyielding authority. As the session drew to a close, Elon's proposals had already ignited discussions among the attendees. Conversations broke out in hushed tones, discussions about the need for reform, the possibility of unbiased judicial oversight, and the role that modern technology could play in ensuring accountability. The fine, once a simple punitive measure, had now become a symbol, a record of a moment when the voice of innovation had stood up to challenge a system resistant to change. Outside the courtroom, as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the marble steps, the impact of the day's events was already rippling through the community. Journalists began gathering outside, their voices filled with anticipation as they prepared to capture the aftermath of a day that promised to reshape the narrative of justice. Elon, with his notebook clutched firmly in hand, exited the courthouse with the measured calm of a man who had faced down an institutional giant and emerged with a vision for a better future. In the days and weeks that followed, the turning point in that courtroom would become a rallying cry for those who believed that fairness and transparency were not mere ideals, but essential pillars of a modern society. The legacy of that moment, etched in every carefully recorded note and every recorded fine, became the foundation upon which a movement for judicial reform would be built. It was a moment of reckoning, when tradition was confronted by the relentless force of innovation, and the echoes of that confrontation would reverberate far beyond the confines of the Silicon Municipal Court. By the time Elon Musk returned to his private office, an ultra-modern space lined with futuristic prototypes, digital canvases of interplanetary maps, and inspirational quotes from visionary thinkers, the repercussions of his courtroom appearance had already begun to spread like wildfire. In the wake of his defiant stance, the story of his courtroom challenge was not confined to the sterile halls of justice. It had become a beacon for reform, a rallying cry that resonated with diverse audiences across multiple sectors. Within hours, social media platforms were abuzz with heated debates and enthusiastic endorsements. Hashtags like Legal Innovator, Justice Ear Reboot, and iFairness in the court began trending, each one a digital testament to the public's response to what many perceived as an audacious challenge to an archaic system. Tweets, blog posts, and news articles from across the nation recounted the details of Elon's encounter, highlighting the fine that had been imposed, the meticulous evidence he had presented, and the calm yet defiant tone that had transformed a routine legal appearance into a landmark moment for justice. Elon's personal phone was inundated with messages. From fellow tech magnates and startup founders to legal scholars and ordinary citizens, each communication carried a note of admiration or an earnest inquiry about the implications of his actions. One message read, "Your courage today isn't just about standing up for yourself. It's about challenging a system that has long ignored the voices of those who dare to innovate. Thank you for inspiring change." Another, from a young law student who had witnessed the proceedings, said, "I never thought a courtroom could become a platform for revolution until I saw your presentation. This changes everything." In his office, surrounded by state-of-the-art displays and holographic projections of the world-changing projects he spearheaded, Elon took a moment to reflect on the unexpected aftermath of his actions. His mind, always in motion, began to consider the far-reaching implications of the movement that was now building. The fine, meticulously recorded on his phone, was no longer a personal blemish but a documented symbol of the systemic biases he had observed. He began to draft a comprehensive report, a document that would serve as both a personal record and a call to action for reform in the judicial system. This report, which he intended to share with legal experts, political advisors, and reform-minded activists, was to be the definitive account of the day's proceedings. It would detail every aspect of the dispute, from the discrepancies in the contract to the nuanced interactions with Judge Cutter, and, crucially, it would expose the broader pattern of bias that he had observed in the treatment of defendants. Elon's report was to be more than just a document. It was a manifesto, a blueprint for transforming an outdated system into one that embraced fairness, transparency, and accountability. In parallel, a group of legal experts and reform activists began to organize impromptu meetings to discuss the implications of Elon's challenge. In small conference rooms, in law school auditoriums, and even in coffee shops across the region, discussions flourished about how to harness this moment to spark a larger movement for judicial reform. These gatherings were characterized by passionate debates about the nature of justice in the modern age, debates that challenged long-held assumptions and called for concrete measures to eliminate bias in legal proceedings. One such meeting took place at a renowned local law firm, where a panel of experienced attorneys, legal scholars, and civil rights advocates gathered to analyze the day's events. They pored over the evidence that Elon had meticulously recorded, noting the discrepancies in how different defendants were treated based on subtle factors like age and reputation. The data was startling. Cases involving younger defendants, particularly those who, like Elon, represented a new generation of innovators, consistently resulted in disproportionately severe penalties. The panel's discussions, rich with statistical analyses and first-hand accounts, began to form the backbone of a broader critique of the system, a critique that demanded not only acknowledgement, but immediate action. As these conversations gained momentum, local and national media outlets picked up on the story. Television news segments, radio talk shows, and online articles began dissecting the details of Elon's courtroom challenge. Reporters sought out interviews with legal experts, technology innovators, and even former courtroom clerks, each one contributing to a growing narrative that painted a stark picture of a system in need of profound change. The public's response was mixed. While many lauded Elon's bravery and intellectual rigor, others questioned the audacity of a business magnate stepping into a realm traditionally reserved for legal professionals. Yet, even the skeptics could not ignore the undeniable impact of his actions. Amid this media frenzy, Elon continued to work quietly in his office. The expansive space, filled with models of futuristic vehicles and digital screens displaying live feeds of global events, became the nexus of a new initiative. He began to schedule meetings with policymakers, regulators, and legal reform advocates, determined to transform his personal experience into a force for systemic change. His vision was clear. The fine, the courtroom challenge, and the subsequent public reaction were all part of a larger struggle against entrenched biases and outdated practices. In one particularly poignant moment, Elon sat down with a group of young lawyers and activists at a local community center. Over cups of ethically sourced coffee and a backdrop of energetic brainstorming sessions, he shared his experiences in the courtroom in painstaking detail. He described the subtle nuances, the tone of Judge Cutter's voice, the almost imperceptible glances exchanged among the courtroom staff, the palpable tension that had built up as he methodically documented every word and gesture. His narrative was not merely an account of a personal legal battle, it was a call to arms, an invitation for a new generation to challenge the status quo and demand justice that was free from the shackles of tradition and bias. The discussion at the community center was both candid and transformative. Young lawyers, some barely out of law school, expressed their own frustrations with a system that often seemed to favor the established and the powerful over the diligent and the innovative. They recounted stories of mentors who had once advised them to accept the status quo, of cases where merit was overshadowed by prejudice. Elon listened intently, nodding in agreement as each story reinforced the urgency of reform. His presence, calm and authoritative, served as a reminder that true change was possible, not through passive acceptance, but through the courage to document every injustice, to speak out even when the odds seemed insurmountable. By the time the evening drew near, the ripple effect of Elon's courtroom rebellion had taken on a life of its own. Across the region, legal symposiums were organized to debate the implications of his actions. The story had transcended the confines of the courthouse, evolving into a movement that bridged the worlds of technology, law, and civic activism. Elon's detailed report, still in the early stages of compilation, was poised to become a seminal document, one that would not only challenge the entrenched biases of the judicial system, but also inspire a new wave of accountability and transparency. In that moment, as the community rallied behind his vision, the true power of one individual's determination became undeniable. Elon Musk's defiant stance in the courtroom had ignited a fire, a burning desire for reform that spread through social media, legal institutions, and the hearts of those who believed in a fairer future. The narrative that began with a contract dispute and a $500 fine had evolved into a full-blown movement, one that promised to rewrite the rules of justice for an entire generation. It was a moment that would be remembered, not for the fine itself, but for the courage to challenge a system that had long been impervious to change. In the days following the courtroom confrontation, the echoes of that historic morning reverberated far beyond the walls of the Silicon Municipal Court. Elon Musk's bold challenge had set in motion a series of events that rapidly transformed the legal landscape and sparked an unprecedented call for reform. In his state-of-the-art office, surrounded by interactive displays and holographic renderings of projects that spanned from electric vehicles to interstellar travel, Elon reviewed the burgeoning response to his actions. The detailed report he had begun drafting now took on new urgency, its pages filled with meticulous notes, photographs, and video clips recorded during the courtroom proceedings. As the report evolved, so did the public reaction. Across social media platforms and online forums, the narrative was quickly reframed as a symbol of the struggle against outdated systems. Hashtags such as #DTIC Justice Reboot and #ETKR Legal Innovator not only trended, but also began to shape public discourse about fairness and accountability. Opinion pieces in major newspapers and editorials on digital platforms hailed the event as a turning point in the fight against institutional bias, a moment when one man's refusal to accept the status quo resonated with a broad cross-section of society. Legal experts, inspired by Elon's detailed account, began to scrutinize historical case records from the Silicon Municipal Court. Independent investigations were launched, and preliminary findings revealed startling patterns. Younger defendants, particularly those from innovative and high-profile backgrounds, consistently received harsher penalties than their older, more conventional counterparts. The data was irrefutable, a systematic bias that, once exposed, demanded immediate redress. In a series of public forums and press conferences, Legal scholars cited these findings as evidence that the fine was not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a deeply entrenched problem. For Elon, the aftermath was a whirlwind of meetings and strategy sessions. He arranged discussions with influential policymakers, regulatory bodies, and reform-minded judges who had themselves grown weary of a system that had failed to evolve with the times. In one such meeting, held in a sleek, glass-walled conference room in downtown Palo Alto, a coalition of technology executives, legal reform advocates, and civic leaders gathered to discuss a roadmap for transforming the judicial process. Over hours of intense deliberation, they explored ideas ranging from the implementation of digital record-keeping systems that could ensure greater transparency to the establishment of independent oversight committees that would monitor judicial conduct and procedural fairness. As these proposals took shape, Elon's detailed report was circulated among key decision-makers. The report, replete with comprehensive analyses, eyewitness accounts, and meticulously recorded data, quickly became the touchstone for discussions about reform. It was more than a document. It was a clarion call to action, a blueprint for a future where justice was administered not on the basis of arbitrary distinctions, but through the consistent application of fairness and accountability. In a series of follow-up interviews with major news outlets, Elon explained, "The fine I incurred today is not just a personal setback. It's a documented instance of a systemic failure. We must use this as an opportunity to reimagine and rebuild our judicial processes so that they serve all citizens equally." The call for reform resonated not only with legal professionals, but also with everyday citizens who had long felt marginalized by a system that seemed to favor the privileged. Across the nation, town hall meetings and community forums erupted in discussions about judicial bias, with residents sharing stories of encounters with an inflexible legal apparatus. In one memorable instance, a retired teacher recounted how her repeated attempts to resolve a minor dispute had been met with indifference and harsh penalties, an experience that now seemed emblematic of a broader pattern of neglect. These personal accounts, when combined with the compelling data from Elon's report, painted a picture of injustice that could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, within the corridors of power, pressure was mounting on the state's Judicial Oversight Committee. Calls for an independent review of courtroom practices grew louder, and members of the committee, faced with mounting evidence, began to reconsider long-held assumptions about judicial conduct. Meetings were convened, and a task force was formed to delve into the patterns revealed by the data. Legal journals published in-depth analyses of the findings, and the debate soon spilled over into legislative sessions, where lawmakers discussed proposals to introduce mandatory bias awareness training for all court personnel and to institute regular audits of courtroom records. For Elon, the transformation was both inspiring and deeply personal. The experience in the courtroom, from the initial fine to the detailed documentation of systemic bias, had become a catalyst for change, a moment when his individual challenge to the old order had ignited a broader movement. In a series of high-profile interviews, he emphasized that innovation was not confined to the realms of technology or space exploration. It extended to every facet of society, including the very mechanisms of justice. "We must not allow tradition to become an excuse for unfairness," he remarked. "Every citizen deserves a judicial system that is transparent, accountable, and equitable." As the weeks turned into months, the effects of the movement became increasingly tangible. The Silicon Municipal Court, once a bastion of rigid adherence to tradition, began to implement changes inspired by the reform proposals. New digital systems were introduced to streamline record-keeping, and a pilot program for independent judicial oversight was launched. Workshops on bias awareness became a regular feature for court personnel, and an independent audit of past cases was initiated to identify and rectify discrepancies. These reforms, though incremental, were the first steps toward a more inclusive and accountable judicial process. Elon's personal journey did not end with the courtroom. In the months that followed, his report was presented at national legal conferences, discussed in academic circles, and even cited by policymakers as a model for reform. His office became a hub for activists and legal reformers who sought to build upon the momentum generated by his bold challenge. Every meeting, every discussion, and every piece of evidence that had been meticulously recorded contributed to a growing narrative. A narrative that celebrated the courage to stand up against systemic injustice and to envision a future where every individual, regardless of age or background, was treated with dignity and fairness. The transformation was far from complete, but the momentum was undeniable. In every corner of the judicial system, from local courthouses to state legislative halls, the conversation had shifted. The legacy of that fateful day, a day marked by a single $500 fine and a defiant challenge to authority, had sparked a movement that promised to reshape not only the legal landscape but the very principles of justice in a rapidly changing world. As the sun rose on a crisp new morning several months after the courtroom confrontation, the landscape of the judicial system had begun to transform in ways that few had imagined possible. Elon Musk's bold challenge had not only become a pivotal moment in the annals of legal reform, but it also established a legacy of transformation that reached far beyond the confines of the Silicon Municipal Court. In his office, now adorned with framed images of the courthouse and copies of media clippings celebrating the movement, Elon reflected on the journey that had taken him from a single legal dispute to the forefront of a nationwide call for change. The evolution of the judicial system had been gradual yet profound. The independent oversight committees that had been formed in the wake of his report began to release their findings to the public. Detailed analyses of court records over the past year revealed significant discrepancies in how penalties were imposed, a clear, statistically supported pattern that confirmed what many had long suspected. Bias was not an aberration, but a systemic issue. These reports, filled with meticulously gathered data, were published in leading legal journals and widely discussed in academic and policy-making circles. They spurred heated debates in legislative assemblies and provided the impetus for a wave of reforms aimed at ensuring that justice was not a privilege of the few, but a right for all. In the corridors of power, the reform movement had taken on a life of its own. Lawmakers, inspired by the compelling evidence and the public outcry that had followed Elon's challenge, began drafting bills to mandate comprehensive bias training for all members of the judiciary. Proposals were introduced to modernize record-keeping in courts, to institute periodic audits of judicial conduct, and to establish community oversight boards that would serve as a check on the exercise of judicial power. These legislative efforts were not without their challenges. Entrenched interests and long-standing traditions often resisted change. Yet, the tide of public opinion was undeniably in favor of reform. The narrative had shifted, and the momentum generated by one man's courage was now a force that could not be ignored. Elon's role in this transformation evolved from that of a solitary challenger to a respected spokesperson for reform. Invitations poured in for him to speak at national conferences, university lectures, and panel discussions, where he was asked to share his insights on the intersection of technology, innovation, and justice. At one such event, held in a sprawling auditorium packed with legal professionals, tech entrepreneurs, and civic activists, he delivered a keynote address that was both inspiring and pragmatic. Innovation, he declared, is not only about rockets and electric cars. It's about challenging the old paradigms that hold us back and forging a future where every individual is treated with fairness and respect. The change we seek in our legal system is not a battle against tradition. It is an evolution toward a system that truly serves all its citizens. His words resonated deeply, and they were echoed by countless others who had been touched by his example. The public's engagement with the movement was evident not only in the media coverage and legislative debates, but also in the grassroots efforts that sprouted across communities. Local legal clinics were established, dedicated to assisting those who had been adversely affected by biased judicial practices. law schools began to incorporate courses on ethics, systemic bias, and judicial reform into their curricula. Community workshops and town hall meetings became common, serving as platforms for citizens to share their experiences and to advocate for a more accountable system of justice. In one poignant scene that epitomized the movement's impact, a small group of young law students gathered outside a courthouse that had recently installed a new sign reading, "Center for Judicial Fairness." One of them, tears of gratitude in her eyes, recounted how Elon's testimony in court had given her the courage to pursue a career in social justice law. "Your actions showed us that it is possible to stand up to an unjust system," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Sometimes all it takes is one person to spark a revolution." That sentiment, echoed in hundreds of similar stories from around the country, was a testament to the enduring legacy of a single, courageous act. Back at his office, Elon reviewed the latest updates on the reform initiatives. The changes were tangible: a marked reduction in unjust fines, the successful implementation of digital monitoring systems in several courthouses, and, most importantly, a shift in the public's trust in the judicial system. The long-fought battle against bias had not been won overnight, but every incremental victory was a step toward a future where justice was more than a hollow promise. As he prepared to draft his next report, a comprehensive review of the changes implemented over the past months, Elon felt a sense of profound satisfaction. He knew that his confrontation in the Silicon Municipal Court was not just a personal milestone, but a spark that had ignited a much larger movement. His actions had not only reformed a single courtroom's practices, but had also set in motion a chain reaction that was challenging deep-seated norms across the entire judicial system. In the twilight of that transformative day, as the city lights began to twinkle against the deepening sky, Elon sat at his desk, surrounded by the tangible markers of change. The framed receipt of the $500 fine hung on the wall, a constant reminder that even setbacks could be transformed into catalysts for progress. It was a symbol of resistance, a reminder that in a world where technology and innovation continually push boundaries, the quest for fairness must never be compromised. Looking out the panoramic window of his office, Elon mused on the future. The legacy of his courtroom challenge was clear. It was a call to all who believed in a just society to remain vigilant, to document every instance of bias, and to never be afraid to stand up for what was right. The movement was still in its infancy, but its roots were deep and its branches spread wide, promising a future where every individual's dignity would be honored by a system designed not to oppress, but to empower. As the night settled over the city, the lights in the courthouse and the halls of government burned steadily, a beacon of hope and a testament to the fact that even the most rigid institutions could be transformed by a single voice. In that quiet, reflective moment, Elon Musk realized that true innovation was not confined to the realms of science and technology. It was also found in the courage to challenge the old order and to build a future that was fairer, more inclusive, and more human. And so, the legacy of that fateful day lived on, a legacy of transformation, resilience, and the unwavering belief that one person's determination could indeed reshape the very foundations of society. The movement for judicial reform was no longer just a distant dream. It had become a living, breathing reality, driven by the collective efforts of those who dared to imagine a better world.